There's always that one moment when you realized someone stopped respecting you. Not because they shouted, not because they attacked you, but because they spoke to you differently. A joke at your expense, a tone that cuts a little deeper than it should, a message they just never replied to. And instead of reacting, you froze. You told yourself to stay calm, to not overthink, to keep the peace. But here's the truth. They weren't just speaking. They were testing your limits, testing how far they can go. And the longer you stay silent, the more certain they become that your silence is guaranteed. Most people think disrespect is about the other person. They imagine it as a series of bad behaviors from rude or selfish people. But the deeper psychological problem sits inside the quiet gap between what you feel and what you allow. You sense that something isn't okay, but you stay silent. You don't want conflict. You don't want to lose connection. You don't want to be seen as difficult. And so you absorb the discomfort privately while presenting calm acceptance publicly. This gap slowly becomes your role. You become the understanding one, the forgiving one, the flexible one, the person who can handle a little more discomfort so that others can stay comfortable. You convince yourself this is maturity. You even wear it as a badge of honor. But underneath that calm exterior is a quiet self-betrayal. You're teaching yourself that your needs are negotiable, while other people's needs are sacred. People rarely realize that disrespect almost never begins loud. It begins small. Subtle dismissals, interruptions, thoughtless jokes, delays, broken promises. Gradually, you are conditioned to believe that speaking up will make things worse, or that you don't have the right to demand better. You internalize the role of the emotionally responsible one, while the other person enjoys the freedom of acting without consequence. Here is where most people misunderstand the problem. They think the solution is to demand respect, to finally confront, to assert. But the real issue is not your ability to speak up in one dramatic moment. It is your relationship with your own boundaries on a daily level. It is whether you believe, deep down, that you are allowed to set the terms of how people interact with you. If you grew up around volatility, manipulation, guilt, or emotional neglect, your nervous system may associate boundaries with danger. Saying no feels like risking abandonment. Asking for fairness feels like stepping into conflict. You become hyper-aware of other people's moods, constantly adjusting yourself to maintain peace. And because of that, disrespect doesn't arrive as shock. It arrives as familiarity, so you tolerate it. And eventually, you begin to wonder why you feel so drained, resentful, or invisible. You start to believe that people are simply unkind, or that meaningful respect is rare. But the truth is more uncomfortable. People mirror the limits you live by. And when your boundaries are unclear, not to others, but to yourself, you leave the door open for disrespect to become the norm, not the exception. To understand boundaries, you have to step beneath behavior and into psychology. Jung would say that much of what we tolerate comes from the shadow, the parts of ourselves we suppress because they don't fit the image we want to present. Many people suppress anger, firmness, or self-protection because they want to be seen as good, agreeable, or morally calm. They believe that refusing someone makes them cold, so they exile their assertiveness into the shadow and pretend they don't need it. But what you suppress doesn't disappear. It returns as resentment. Nietzsche warned that suppressed resentment becomes a quiet moral poison. Outwardly, you appear kind. Inwardly, you keep score. You wait for others to finally repay the patience you've shown them. You hope your tolerance will be recognized and respected. But people rarely respond to what you silently feel. They respond to what you consistently allow. Another layer sits deeper: identity. If your worth is tied to being needed, liked, or accepted, then boundaries feel like a threat to your identity. Saying no feels like becoming someone colder. This is where power dynamics emerge. The person without boundaries unconsciously gives power to others, not because the others are powerful, but because your internal rule says, my comfort matters less than their approval. When you internalize that rule, the world reorganizes around it. You attract, tolerate, and even normalize relationships where your needs are secondary. It feels natural, predictable, and when someone finally respects your limits, it feels strangely uncomfortable, as though you haven't earned it. Fear drives this system. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of creating distance. Fear of losing connection. Ironically, this fear ensures that the connection you keep is always unsafe. Because it relies on your silence, boundaries are not walls. They are simply the edges of self-respect. They define where your responsibility ends and another person's begins. Without them, relationships slide into quiet chaos. People push as far as the situation allows, not always out of malice, but out of habit, stress, self-interest, or lack of awareness. Boundaries are the friction that keeps that push from becoming harm. Psychologically, the moment you allow repeated disrespect, you enter a loop. You feel hurt, then guilty for feeling hurt, then silent to avoid conflict, then disconnected from yourself. The ego tries to protect you by rationalizing the behavior. They didn't mean it. It's not a big deal. This is just how they are. Over time, that rationalization becomes your prison, and the shadow waits. Eventually, suppressed anger leaks out in passive-aggressive comments, emotional withdrawal, or sudden explosions that feel out of character. But these reactions are not sudden. They are the bill arriving for all the times you avoided paying honestly. True boundaries begin internally. They are not about controlling others. They are about deciding what you will and will not participate in. When that decision becomes stable, consistent, and calm, people feel it. And the entire dynamic changes, not because you became louder, but because you stopped negotiating your worth in silence. Here is the truth most people resist. Disrespect continues because it is allowed. Not in a moral sense, not in a blame-based way, but in a psychological one. Every relationship, from casual to intimate, is built on unspoken rules. And if one of those rules is that you will tolerate subtle harm to avoid discomfort, the other person will unconsciously live inside that rule. Another truth is even harder to accept. People respect what they risk losing. When someone knows you will stay, no matter how you feel, your value becomes background noise, familiar, expected, not special. Boundaries reintroduce risk. They communicate. If this continues, the relationship will change, not out of anger, but out of necessity. This doesn't mean others are cruel. It means humans respond to incentives. If disrespect has no consequence, it becomes efficient, easy, convenient. The final uncomfortable truth is internal. You may benefit, psychologically, from being disrespected. You may feel morally superior. You may feel like the wounded, noble one who endures. This identity can become addictive. It protects you from the fear of standing alone. But it also keeps you trapped in dynamics that slowly erode your sense of self. Boundaries threaten that identity, because when you set them, you can no longer hide behind hurt. You must become responsible for your life, for who stays, for who leaves, for the tone of your relationships. And responsibility is heavier than resentment. So the core truth is this: boundaries are not about teaching others how to behave. They are about teaching yourself what you will no longer betray inside your own psychology. Until that shift happens, every script you speak aloud will sound like negotiation. And negotiation invites testing. When the boundary lives inside you, steady, calm, and quiet, you don't need to threaten, explain, or convince. You simply stop participating in dynamics that require you to shrink. Some people will adjust. Some will leave. Both outcomes reveal the truth of the relationship more clearly than words ever could. Start with this internal shift. You do not need to justify your limits. A boundary is not a debate. It's a simple statement of reality. This doesn't work for me. Speak it calmly. Not as accusation. Not as a plea. Just as truth. The less emotional charge you add, the clearer it becomes. Second, tolerate the discomfort that follows. Your nervous system may panic. You may feel guilt, fear, or doubt. Stay with it. This is the cost of reclaiming your self-respect. Over time, the discomfort fades, and what remains is relief, not because others changed, but because you stopped abandoning yourself. Third, match your words with action. If someone continues a pattern after you've made your boundary clear, reduce your availability. Step back. Stop feeding the dynamic. You do not need drama. You only need consistency. Fourth, begin noticing where you over-explain. Over-explaining is often a sign you're trying to earn the right to have needs. You don't need to earn that right. You already have it. And finally, remember that boundaries are not about control. You will lose some relationships. You will disappoint people. You will be misunderstood. But the relationships that remain, and the ones that arrive, will be built on something rare: mutual respect instead of silent sacrifice. There will always be people who test your edges. Some consciously, most unconsciously. The deeper question is whether you will keep abandoning yourself each time it happens. When you stop making yourself the emotional cushion for other people's behavior, the world becomes quieter. Some connections fall away. Others deepen. But the biggest change happens inside. You no longer wait for others to finally treat you the way you deserve. You become the one who protects that standard. Boundaries don't make you hard. They make you honest. Honest about what you feel. Honest about what you need. Honest about what you refuse to carry anymore. And honesty, even when silent, carries a presence that cannot be faked. Most people go their entire lives hoping to be respected. A few realize that respect is simply the natural consequence of refusing to negotiate your worth. The choice is subtle, and it's yours.